The lake was vanishing before my eyes, pumps roaring, fish flailing in the cracked mud, and tanker trucks lined up like vultures. I stormed down barefoot phone recording as Beatrice Holloway stood smugly on the HOA side arms, crossed like a queen draining her kingdom. That was the moment I knew this wasn't about mosquitoes, this was a war. The pumps started before sunrise. I remember the sound before I even opened my eyes, low, mechanical, and angry, like something growling through the mist. By the time I stepped onto my porch with my coffee barefoot and expecting nothing more than a peaceful morning, the world I had built for myself was already unraveling. Across the shimmering surface of Willowbend Lake, on the HOA side, massive diesel pumps stood like beasts with steel jaws, their hoses snaking down into the water, pulling it out by the thousands of gallons. The air reeked of fuel and wet earth. It didn't take long to see what was happening. The lake, the same mirror-still lake I'd fished every morning since I moved here, was vanishing right in front of me. I nearly dropped the mug from my hands. I walked fast, not quite running across the dew-soaked grass, toward the dividing line, my legal property ending, where the HOA-managed shoreline began. And there she was, Beatrice Holloway. Arms folded, dark sunglasses perched high on her nose, like some kind of military commander overseeing a campaign. She didn't flinch when I approached. Didn't even greet me. "What the hell is this?" I asked, my voice surprisingly steady. Beatrice turned slowly, her lips curling into a smile that had the warmth of a winter wind. "Routine mosquito mitigation," she said, as if the choking rumble of industrial machines and the sight of water disappearing into tanker trucks was perfectly normal. "You didn't notify anyone," I replied. "This lake is half mine, Beatrice. That deed is on file with the county. You don't get to touch a drop without my consent." She tilted her head, slightly feigning patience. "The board voted," she said. "This is in the community's best interest." I looked past her water lines, receding fish, flopping helplessly in the shrinking shallows, birds circling overhead in confusion. The reflection of the trees that once danced on the water's surface was now distorted in cracked, exposed mud. "Community safety," she added, clearly rehearsed. "No one likes mosquitoes, Franklin." My blood was boiling now, but I knew better than to scream. I'd spent 40 years in courtrooms learning how to make my words cut without raising my voice. "You're draining an ecosystem," I said flatly, "not a kiddie pool." She waved a hand dismissively, already turning to bark instructions to a man in a neon vest. I stood there another few seconds, trying to grasp how this could have happened. How a few people hiding behind a board title and a stack of HOA bylaws could unilaterally decide to kill a living, breathing body of water. When I got back to the house, I grabbed my camera. Years in litigation taught me one lesson above all: record everything. I filmed the pumps, the hoses, the mud flats forming where lily pads once bloomed. I walked the entire shoreline on my side, capturing fish gasping for air and the remains of turtle nests now abandoned in the drying silt. I documented the violation in full-time stamped geotag narrated. And when I turned to see Arthur Jensen, my neighbor and unofficial mayor of Willowbend, standing by the cypress trees at the edge of his lot, I knew I wasn't alone. Arthur's face was grave. He had a faded fishing hat in one hand and a thermos in the other. They held a vote in secret, he told me in a hushed voice. Last week, no agenda, no notice. Just passed it behind closed doors. Why, I asked. I already knew the answer. Some landscaping proposal. They want to fill this in. Build a reflection garden or maybe a gazebo. Make it look more polished for the real estate flyers. I felt sick. What they were doing wasn't just short-sighted, it was criminal. I spent the next 2 days like a man possessed. My home office, once a place for crossword puzzles and birdwatching journals, became a war room. I dug through county records, environmental ordinances, HOA covenants. I pulled up every permit filed within the last year. Nothing. Not a single legal form allowing for water removal. No mosquito treatment plan filed with the county. No impact study. And then I found it. Down in the furthest recesses of the lake bed, now a steaming basin of cracked soil and stranded wildlife, I saw them, tiny silver-blue creatures, wriggling desperately in a muddy pocket. I knew the shape, the fins, the markings. Years ago, I'd seen them in a National Geographic article pinned to my office wall. Blue-speckled minnows, an endangered species, protected under both state and federal law. My hands trembled as I scooped the survivors into a bucket, photographing each step, noting the GPS location. Then I made the call. The woman on the other end of the line, North Carolina Environmental Enforcement Division, started casual half-listening. That changed the moment I mentioned the species name. Her tone shifted. Fast. Do not touch anything else, she ordered. Keep the site intact. Document what you can. We'll dispatch a response team immediately. I hung up my bucket cradled in my arms, standing ankle-deep in the ruined basin that used to be the soul of Willow Bend. This was no longer a neighborhood dispute. This was a federal matter. Beatrice Holloway and her clique had crossed a line written in stone and signed into law. I wasn't just angry, I was activated. I didn't retire to this lake to babysit a bunch of bored power mongers trying to manicure nature into submission. I came here for peace. I came here for the water. And now they'd poisoned it with arrogance and bulldozed it with ignorance. But they picked the wrong man to push. I was going to bring the weight of the law crashing down on them, every section, every statute, every page of it. I took one last long look at what used to be my sanctuary. A heron landed nearby, looking confused, its spindly legs sinking into the drying muck. The morning sun was climbing now, casting long shadows across the basin, illuminating every crack and every crime. I turned back toward the house, my camera still running, my jaw clenched tight. The war for Willow Bend had just begun. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. My body was in bed, but my mind was still knee-deep in the lake bed, standing over mud-crusted minnows and staring into the eyes of a dying ecosystem. By the time the sun broke across the tree line, I was already dressed, already brewing a fresh pot of coffee, already on the phone with every state and federal environmental agency I could find. To their credit, they moved quickly. By noon, a white SUV with government plates rolled down Willow Bend Drive and parked at the edge of my lawn. A woman in hiking boots and mirrored sunglasses stepped out, flashing a badge that read, Environmental Enforcement Division, State of North Carolina. Her name was Rachel Cook, and she wasn't here for pleasantries. We walked the shoreline together, and I showed her everything: where the pumps had stood, where the minnows had wriggled, where the turtles had been stranded in their own drying homes. I gave her the footage, the photos, the timestamps. Her jaw tightened with every new angle. You understand what this means, Mr. Morris, she said after an hour of surveying. If what you've recorded here checks out, and it looks like it does, this isn't just a zoning issue. This is a violation of the Endangered Species Act. Federal law. I nodded. I figured. We'll be escalating. She didn't need to say more. She handed me a temporary case number, then disappeared behind the tinted windows of her SUV. I stood there a moment longer, alone again, but not powerless. I could feel the tide turning. That evening, as I uploaded a full drive of evidence to multiple secure folders and sent copies to my cloud backup, my inbox pinged with the first media inquiry. A local news station wanted to talk. The next morning, I was standing in front of a camera microphone clipped to my flannel collar, trying to describe what it felt like to watch a lake die while your HOA smiled through it. The segment aired at 6 p.m. sharp. They called it the Willow Bend water scandal. By the time I went to bed that night, my phone had 23 new voicemails. Not all of them were friendly. The HOA wasted no time. First came the bright yellow letter taped to my front door, filled with legal posturing and threats accusing me of violating community cohesion by making unauthorized statements to the press. Then came the emails, one after another, thinly veiled attacks wrapped in pseudo-professionalism. We value your enthusiasm for the lake, one said, but would appreciate if all future concerns are routed through official HOA channels. It was like being gaslit with a clipboard. Then came the flyers slipped into every mailbox along Willow Bend Drive. Don't let fear divide our community. It read in bold script across the top. Below it, paragraphs of bureaucratic fluff that painted me as a disruptive, bitter newcomer. They made it sound like I was trying to torch the whole neighborhood, not save its only natural resource. I might have laughed if it hadn't worked. Neighbors who once waved to me now looked the other way. The older couple across the street, the same ones who'd brought over banana bread my first week, suddenly pulled into their garage with the door already halfway down. Even the kids I used to teach how to cast a line avoided the dock now. But I knew what was happening. I'd seen it before, back in courtrooms, boardrooms, negotiations. When someone with a paper crown gets scared, they throw sand. So I doubled down. I turned my living room into a staging area. Every printed threat, every HOA email, every flyer and post-it note got scanned, documented, filed. I bought 3 more external hard drives and backed up everything again. I even contacted Arthur Jensen to sign a notarized statement about what he'd overheard from the secret vote. Then I made the smartest call of all. I called Samantha Ortega. I remembered her from a seminar I attended years ago in Raleigh. Sharp, relentless, and not afraid of a camera. She specialized in environmental litigation and had made a name for herself going after coal ash polluters and private developers who thought fines were cheaper than ethics. Samantha drove up 3 days later in a black sedan with Virginia plates and a tablet under her arm. She didn't bother with small talk. I handed her everything and she didn't flinch. "You did your homework," she said, flipping through the timestamps. "We can work with this." The town hall was scheduled that Friday night. The HOA called it an open dialogue forum, but we all knew it was a PR stunt. Beatrice Holloway stood at the front in a navy dress suit, smiling like a politician under heat lamps. The room was full, neighbors packed into folding chairs, some holding coffee cups like shields. Samantha and I sat in the back row, letting the tension simmer. Beatrice started the meeting with a statement about rumors and misinformation, praising the HOA's proactive approach to community wellness. Every buzzword in the dictionary. She even mentioned the mosquito problem again, as if it justified turning a freshwater lake into a puddle. Then she invited community feedback. I stood up. So did Samantha. The room went dead silent. "We have some concerns," Samantha said, her voice smooth and precise, walking down the aisle like a trial attorney approaching the jury. "Legal concerns. Federal concerns." She dropped a thick packet on the table in front of Beatrice. "This includes documentation of unpermitted environmental disruption, recorded evidence of endangered species being harmed, and internal communications suggesting willful negligence." Beatrice didn't touch the packet. She just stared, her face turning the color of week-old milk. "Copies," Samantha added, "have also been provided to state officials, the Department of Justice, and the local press." Gasps rippled through the room. Someone took out their phone. Another neighbor whispered, "Is that true?" One of the board members tried to speak, but Samantha raised a hand. "Further discussion is not advisable pending formal investigations." And just like that, the meeting was over. Beatrice didn't even say goodbye. Over the next few days, the neighborhood changed. People began knocking on my door again, not with baked goods, but with questions. Did they really drain it without a permit? Was that fish really endangered? What's going to happen to the HOA? I answered what I could, but I didn't have to say much. Because then came the leak. It landed in my inbox late Tuesday night, a thread of emails from inside the HOA board sent anonymously. The messages were damning. Jokes about finally getting rid of the slimy fish, plans to install a photogenic reflection space, and one message from Beatrice herself. "Franklin can't stop us. It's our lake now. Let's make it pretty." I sent the entire thread to Samantha, to Rachel Cook, and to every journalist who'd ever left a message on my voicemail. The story exploded. News trucks lined up along the cul-de-sac by Thursday morning. Local coverage turned national. Hashtags began trending. Greker save Willowbend, Narkarsh HOA havoc, sure don't drain nature. Environmental groups joined the chorus, filing public complaints and threatening civil suits of their own. By Friday, the HOA treasurer resigned. Saturday morning, 2 more board members followed. Beatrice held a closed-door meeting on Sunday, but nobody showed up. Even her inner circle was gone. I watched it all from my porch, coffee in hand, the lake still a muddy scar in the middle of our once peaceful community. I didn't smile. Not yet. The fight wasn't over. Not until justice was deeper than the water they drained. Not until the minnows came home. By the time Sunday night rolled around, the HOA boardroom was quieter than a church pew after scandal. The parking lot was empty, the blinds were drawn, and Beatrice Holloway, once the queen of Willowbend, was nowhere to be seen. I watched it all from my porch, coffee cup in hand, the same spot where I had stood just weeks ago, watching the water vanish into industrial hoses. But this time, there were no pumps, no trucks, no lies hiding behind emails. This time, there was only the silence that comes before impact. On Monday morning, the silence ended. Federal SUVs rolled through the neighborhood at dawn, unmarked, low profile, but unmistakable. Their tires crunched gravel like a countdown. I watched from the window as agents and windbreakers moved with quiet efficiency through the HOA office, emerging with boxes of documents, hard drives, laptops, some sealed in evidence bags marked EPA Environmental Crimes Unit. The board had tried to put out the fire with paper. Now they were drowning in it. By noon, the charges hit the wire. Beatrice Holloway, Frederick Nance, Louise Bernard. 3 names, 3 indictments. Environmental destruction, permit falsification, obstruction of justice. All felonies, all federal. The news stations didn't hold back. Willow Bend Lake scandal HOA leaders arrested in federal raid. Feds move on HOA after endangered species destroyed. Power, greed, and mud, a community divided by Drain Lake. Samantha Ortega, ever composed, gave a calm but pointed interview in front of the county courthouse, holding up the now famous packet of evidence. Let this be a reminder, she said, that community leadership is not a license to break the law. And when you tamper with nature, justice doesn't just knock, it kicks the door in. The backlash was immediate. Willow Bend's HOA insurance provider sent out a terse letter to all members citing criminal activity clauses and formally announcing they would not be covering any legal expenses, settlements, or fines related to the incident. Translation: the board was on its own. And we, the community, were holding the bill. Special assessments were discussed. Emergency meetings were called. Homeowners who'd once voted blindly for HOA motions now demanded answers. People stopped pretending everything was fine. A few began placing for sale signs on their lawns, hoping to distance themselves before the financial dam burst. But the lawsuits came faster. I filed first property destruction, loss of enjoyment, environmental trauma. I itemized everything, every fish, every stump, every inch of shoreline that had once brought me peace. Samantha added a claim for emotional distress, citing harassment and public defamation. Arthur Jensen filed next, accusing the HOA of trespassing and endangering native wildlife he had once helped protect as a game warden. Then came the rest. The Websters, who lost the wetland buffer behind their backyard. The Changs, whose child used to watch tadpoles grow in the shallows. Even Margaret Langley, a soft-spoken widow from the East Cul-de-sac, filed a claim after discovering her rose bushes had been killed off by exposure to lakebed sediment dragged up by the draining. The dam had broken, and the lawsuits poured in like floodwaters. That's when Beatrice tried her last gambit. She blamed the contractor, claimed the landscaping firm had exceeded their mandate, that they were the ones who acted without proper permits. She called it a miscommunication. But Carlos Ramirez, the owner of Green Horizons Landscaping, wasn't about to take the fall. At a press conference on the courthouse steps, Carlos stood behind his attorney holding up a printed copy of the text message from Beatrice that said, "Get it drained fast before anyone starts asking questions. The fish won't sue us." The room went silent. That single message, along with a string of damning emails where board members called him our perfect scapegoat, became the final nail in the coffin. The DOJ amended their charges to include conspiracy to commit fraud. Willow Bend's name was now cemented in public shame. But nature, as it often does, had its own plans for poetic justice. The rain started on a Wednesday, light at first, a steady drizzle like the kind you sleep through. But then came Thursday, and the skies opened like a broken dam. Rain lashed the rooftops, filled gutters, drowned storm drains. Streets became rivers. Front yards turned to marsh. And with the lake beds still a hollowed-out shell, there was nowhere for the water to go. The overflow surged through the neighborhood. The reflection garden Beatrice had commissioned gone, washed away like chalk under a faucet. The newly landscaped walking path collapsed into a trench of mud and clay. Several houses along the old shoreline flooded through the foundations. Sump pumps failed. Basements filled with brown water and black mold. Electrical systems shorted. Driveways cracked. Walls buckled. FEMA declared the area a flood risk. Insurance companies, already jittery, refused coverage, citing man-made topographical interference. It was brutal, but it was honest. It was nature reminding Willow Bend that you don't pave over a wetland and expect it to forget. The storm passed, but the scars remained. At the next emergency HOA meeting, only a dozen people showed up. The rest were lawyering up. Beatrice Holloway never returned to the podium. Her house, once the model home featured in HOA brochures, was repossessed by the bank after legal fees devoured her savings. She never even came back to pack her things. Movers came with boxes, then left in silence. In her place, a new board was quietly formed, this time volunteers. People who actually lived here because they cared, not because they needed something to control. Arthur Jensen was elected president unanimously. His first act, motion to reinstate the name Willow Bend Lake on all community documents. His second A vote to dissolve the current HOA charter and refile as a Conservation First Community Association. This time, there were no objections. The new board commissioned a local artist, a young woman named Maddie Rios, who'd grown up catching frogs on the lake's edge, to sculpt a memorial from a fallen cypress trunk. She carved a leaping minnow in mid-arc, its body detailed with scales and ripples. Below it, etched deep into the base, were the words, "Honor what lives here." It was placed right where the water first began to return. Because yes, the lake came back, slowly, quietly, with patience. The rains helped. Volunteers helped more. We worked with local biologists, replanted native grasses, installed erosion buffers, and once cleared by the state, reintroduced blue-speckled minnows into the reborn shallows. The frogs came back next, then the herons, then the dragonflies that danced like sparks over morning light. The day I launched my John boat again, the water lapped gently against the dock. I pushed off slowly, oars creaking like old friends waking up. A thermos of coffee in one hand, my other trailed through the cool surface. Ripples spread out like a breath returned. I drifted to the center and paused, closed my eyes, listened to the sounds I thought I'd lost forever: birdsong, the rustle of reeds, a single fish breaking the surface in pursuit of a bug. Behind me, I could almost hear Beatrice's voice echoing from some distant memory, lecturing about property values and mosquito control. But out here on the lake that had survived her, the only voice that mattered was the one carried by the wind, soft, patient, undeterred. Justice didn't just arrive, it stayed. And for the first time in a long time, Willow Bend was quiet again for the right reasons. The story of Willow Bend Lake isn't just about a drained body of water, it's about how quickly power, pride, and unchecked authority can strip away not just nature, but the trust and peace of an entire community. At its heart, it's a warning when a few people believe they are above the law. It often takes just one voice, one witness, one act of courage to begin the course correction. Franklin Morris, a retired attorney simply looking for peace by the water, didn't plan to wage war with his HOA. But when faced with injustice, he leaned on truth, persistence, and the law, not vengeance. And in doing so, he reminded all of us of something vital: we each have a responsibility to speak up, even when it's uncomfortable, especially when it's unpopular. Too often, we ignore the small signs in email that feels off a neighbor's concern, brushed aside a vote taken in silence. But when decisions are made in the shadows, the damage eventually reaches the light. In this case, it was a lake bed turned to mud-endangered species left to die, and an entire community forced to reckon with what happens when leadership loses sight of stewardship. This story also speaks to the power of documentation, legal literacy, and standing your ground peacefully but firmly. Franklin never raised his voice, but he raised his evidence, and he never stood alone. From Samantha Ortega's legal skill, to Arthur Jensen's wisdom, to volunteers planting life back into the soil, the community found its healing in unity and purpose. But perhaps the most powerful lesson is this: nature always remembers. You can try to silence it, pave over it, drain it dry, but it will return stronger if given care. And so will justice. And so will hope. Your support helps us share powerful, instructive stories like this one, drawn from the everyday experiences and struggles of people who chose to do what's right when it mattered most. If you found value in this message, consider sharing it with someone who needs a reminder that even a quiet voice backed by truth and resolve can spark real change. Until next time, stay observant, stay courageous, and never underestimate the ripple effect of standing up for what matters.